The Iowa legislative session is underway, over a month in, and we're here today to learn about some of the issues at the State House that are impacting agriculture. Joining us now on the program is Johnathan Hladik from the Center for Rural Affairs. Johnathan, thanks for coming back on with our network. How are you doing?
Great, Brent. Thank you so much for having us today.
Absolutely. Johnathan, we had you on here a few months back talking about some issues impacting agriculture. You might just remind our listeners a little bit about your background with the Center for Rural Affairs.
Yeah, that's right. We're a private independent nonprofit, and we have offices in Nevada, Iowa, and in Lyons, Nebraska. We've been around since 1973, and a big part of what we do is state policy. So, in the Nebraska legislature and in the Iowa State House, we are tracking bills and introducing legislation and advocating for pieces of potential law that we know are going to affect small town rural communities and the family farm. And we're always looking out for the family farmer, and that's what we'll be looking at today, too.
Well, like we said, well underway with the legislative session in Iowa this year. I know a lot of those funnel deadlines are around the corner. Some have passed, but you might tell our listeners a little bit about, what you're seeing at the State House right now. What are some of the issues that agriculture is keeping an eye on?
Yeah, first funnel deadline has officially passed, and that's always a good sign. It reduces the numbers of bills that you have to follow, and that's something that we always welcome. Obviously, tax reform bills are getting a lot of attention right now, and for good reason. We're particularly interested in the Senate bill. It's unique in that this is the one that would fund Iowa's Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, or IWIL, and by a sales tax increase included in that legislation. Listeners might remember IOL was created way back in 2010 with the support of 63% of Iowans, but it has remained unfunded ever since. And so taking that step here in the Senate proposal, we think is a good sign. I know Governor Reynolds had some proposals around this too about 2 years ago that we were very supportive of. It's a big bill, and there are a lot of moving pieces. In particular, there are some questions about how repurposing the local option sales tax is going to end up affecting some of our rural communities. And that's something we're following and something that legislators are going to need to come to a resolution on. But IWIL itself has a lot to like if you are an ag producer and you are interested in local control. For example, Section 206 of the bill would increase funding for the local conservation partnership program. And the reason why we think that's important for rural Iowa is because this provides needed support for watershed management authorities. Most of you know that these are boards made up of local individuals that provide a great alternative to the type of top-down water quality management decisions that we're typically seen out of Washington, D.C. or Des Moines. It's better to have the people that you know around you, local people making local decisions. That's not the end of the story for watershed management authorities. Right now, Representative David Seek and Northern Momsen are doing really good work in the House, looking for alternative ways to firm up some of these WMAs, especially those that are running out of money at the beginning of June. But to see this move forward in the Senate is a good step, and to see those conversations take root in the House is something that we're really supportive of.
Johnathan, another issue that seems to keep coming up year after year is water quality. Is this another topic that is currently being discussed at the State House this year?
Yeah, it is. There are a couple different proposals. One to increase the number of practices that are going to be able to be supported when counties are taking on watershed efforts. And then, of course, you have this look at IWIL. It's something that is going to keep being part of the conversation in Iowa. And as an ag producer myself, there's nothing I want less than having a top-down regulation that's going to tell me what to do by someone who doesn't understand how I do it. And so when we can find ways to support watershed management authorities, when we can find ways to incentivize practices, to get voluntary practices in place, to have local people deciding what the most effective practices will be, then we're in a really good spot. So if we don't make the progress we need to on WMAs this session, then you can expect to hear more about it next session as well.
And also, last year, a big topic at the State House was the meat processing bill that went through. That was something you and I talked about in our last video update. Anything this year about that in regards to maybe the task force for that meat processing bill?
Yeah, that's right, Brent. That was a really important issue to work on. We were really excited for Representative Chad Ingles to be able to usher that through, and we enjoyed working with him on that. Uh, Part one of that bill created a grant program, and that has made a strong impact in our local independent meat lockers. A lot of them have been able to expand, get more efficient equipment in place, get more freezer space. And that's been really good for the local producers throughout the state. The second part of that bill last year was to create an artisanal butchery task force. And the recommendations for that task force happened in late 2021. And those recommendations were included in HF 2470, which did advance out of the Ag Committee last week. And basically, these recommendations would help establish a framework for a 1 year community college certificate butchery education program, because we know workforce is really tough right now. We know that's one of the hardest parts. This is a skilled job. You need to have some skills to be a butcher and to work in one of these shops, and to have the training to help you be the best that you can be, and to grow it into a livelihood is really important. So this community college certificate is going to be a big step in that direction. But we also know that when we are creating a new meat locker or we're expanding, that there are a lot of, federal regulations, in some case state regulations that you have to apply for, permits you have to receive. And so the task force also recommended creating a library of resources for businesses to look at for examples of what some of those permit applications might look like. So you kind of know what you're talking about on the food safety side of things, and also building out a direct to consumer toolkit that really lays out the regulations and explanations for how we can help our ag producers better approach local consumers, or even those consumers that live in the city, 10, 20, 30 miles away, maybe even an hour away, to make sure that you have clients there, you have customers there, and you can serve those customers.
And Jonathan, I'm curious, with that bill that was approved last year, are we seeing some of those small meat processors benefit from the meat processing bill?
Absolutely, there is no question. We are seeing capacity firm up in the state, and that's a good thing. A lot of times, the capacity we're seeing increase right now was the low hanging fruit. If you knew that a more efficient wrapper or a larger freezer was going to really move the needle tremendously for your operation, then we're seeing those happen. Those are in place right now. And now some of the task force recommendations are looking a little bit further down the road. What can we do to make sure that this part of the industry is more resilient? What can we do to make sure it's stronger, to make sure that it's big enough to really encourage that direct to consumer marketing approach that is so important for Iowa farmers? If you're a new farmer and you're just getting into the business, whether it's beef or whether it's swine, it's going to be tough sometimes for you to make a good living, or to make a living at all selling to some of those big packers. And so when you can develop a premium product on your own, when you can approach some local stores or some local restaurants and get some of those consumers involved, you can get started. You can get started and you can build a really important business. And I think that this will help those individuals tremendously.
Jonathan, another bill that we want to highlight today that people are keeping an eye on, it's a bill that would prohibit the development of solar on ag land. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. I think the authors of this bill might mean well, but the bill goes probably a little bit too far than most Iowans would want to see. It's SF 2321, and essentially it would establish a handful of new statewide siting standards for solar development. And the way it's written now, it would significantly restrict potential development in 63 of Iowa's 99 counties. It would be done by using something called a corn suitability rating. And they set a standard fairly high, and it says any type of land that has a standard of 65 or above wouldn't be eligible for any type of solar development. And that might make sense, I think, if you're in an office writing a bill. But if you're a farmer or landowner in rural Iowa, there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle. Some land performs a little bit better than others. Some land's a little more rocky than you'd like it to be. And I don't think we want some statewide board or some state legislation telling us exactly what we can and can't do in our land with such a broad brush. I think that a lot of these decisions do need to be made at the local level. I think landowner rights should be a prime consideration. And though this bill did advance out of committee, we think that legislators hopefully will take a look at those realities and see, if this is going to move forward, how it can be tweaked in a way that's uh, a little bit more appropriate, I think, for those individuals owning land in rural Iowa.
Now, before we let you go, folks might be curious, how does your group, the Center for Rural Affairs, How do you keep track of all these bills going on at the State House? Do you have a team that's like dedicated to covering the session? What's that whole process look like for you guys?
Yeah, Brent, that's exactly right. We have a great team in place, a couple individuals in Iowa and a couple individuals in Nebraska. And we have people with a strong background in agriculture, a strong background in energy, a strong background in water quality. And they're able to track those bills and they're able to follow them throughout the process and reach out to lawmakers to get that background we need, or reach out to other organizations to understand the perspective that's going to help us. But it all starts at the end of the day with our board members, with our advisory committees, with our supporters in Iowa and in Nebraska. We have a lot of people tell us, they'll hear of a bill and they'll flag it for us, or they'll be concerned about an issue in their local community and they'll flag that for us too. And that makes it a little bit easier for us to go in and narrow it down, see which ones really merit our attention, and see which ones we need to focus on as the session proceeds.
Very good. Johnathan, how can our farmer listeners stay connected with the work from your group today?
You can find us at cfra.org, and in Iowa and Nebraska both, we do have bi-weekly legislative updates. So if you can go to the website, find a way to sign up for those, and you'll get an update on the 20 to 25 to 30 bills that we're prioritizing each session and following through the process.
Awesome. Hey, Johnathan, really appreciate the time. Thanks for coming back on our program again this month.
Thanks so much, Brent. I always enjoy it.
Very good. Again, that's Johnathan Hladik with the Center for Rural Affairs here on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.